So this is Ashley Whittle, and we are in special collections today, or I am in special collections today, and everyone else is where they are. And we are doing a brown bag talk with Bert Holmes and Tim Elgren, who we are pretty sure is going to show up in a few minutes, and Charlotte Smith. And we will let Charlotte Smith take it away, and Bert and Tim can introduce themselves as well.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thanks for having us be part of the Brown Bag Talks. I'm Charlotte Smith, University Grants Manager here at UNC Asheville. I am really kind of a one-woman shop. I'm part of the Office of the Provost, but it's just me in my role here, and I've been here at UNC Asheville now for about 5.5 years. Before I came here, I was the Assistant Director of Sponsored Programs at Appalachian State. And before that, I worked for a nonprofit, a local arts council. And that's where I really got my start writing grants and where I discovered that I really enjoyed that process. And so when I moved over to App State, I quickly moved into sponsored programs in order to help other people with their grants, because I really enjoy that process and especially enjoy helping others find their way through that process. Yeah, I'll explain a little bit more about the ways I can support folks in doing that when we get to my portion of things. But right now, I'll turn it over to you, Bert.
So I'm Bert Holmes. I have 3 of my colleagues from chemistry that I know and know me. I don't know Ava, but I'll ask about her in a minute. So I was asked by Tim to join this group, and I guess he did it because I've done these workshops at other institutions. Actually, I did it once with Tim, and then I was funded for, I think, 26 years in a row by the National Science Foundation for my research. So, and I was a program officer at NSF for 3 years. So that's my background and why I've learned a lot about writing grants.
Thank you, Bert. Yeah, Bert is such a great resource here on our campus and has always been so ready and willing to, help folks out and send portions of sample proposals, when people have needed just a little bit of extra guidance. And I know people appreciate that, Bert. So what Tim and Bert and I kind of envisioned sharing with you today is not so much the nuts and bolts of putting together a grant proposal, but instead what it is that people need to think about even before they begin to put together a grant proposal. Thinking about those things that make you ready to submit a proposal. What do you need to think about and do in order to get yourself positioned for submitting a competitive proposal? Because there are things that grant reviewers look for when they receive proposals. And so sometimes I think people are eager to write a grant and jump in there and then find out that maybe there are some things they could have been doing in the last year or so to just position themselves a little better, to make themselves a stronger candidate and more successful. And so that's what we kind of envisioned today as doing. And Tim and Bert were going to really speak to that part of it. Tim is a former faculty member and has written and received grants himself before he joined UNC Asheville in his current roles. And so he and Bert were planning to speak about that. But since Tim must be having some delays and hasn't joined us yet, yeah, I thought maybe we could just jump in with my slides. And let me just tell you a little bit about how I can support folks, and then some things you can do once you do get your proposal ready. Let me share my screen here and get my slides going. All right, is everybody able to see that? Okay, great. So yeah, we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit since we're waiting on Tim to join us. So as University Grants Manager, let me just go over some ways if you're not already familiar with how I can support you. So if you have an idea for a grant proposal and you're looking for funding opportunities that might fit that, I can help you do that. There is a funding database I can sign you up with where we can do some funding searches, and we can talk about other places to look for those funding opportunities. And once we find them, then I can help you review what the call for proposal is asking for, what the guidelines are for that particular grant, and if need be, and I highly encourage this, connect you with a program officer. I think it's a great idea if you can reach out to a program officer and have a conversation about what you're thinking of proposing, whether that's a good fit for that particular program you're looking at, or whether that might be a better fit with another program they're doing, and just get some good feedback because program officers are really key to helping you determine if that is the right fit and how to best position yourself. I can also help folks create timelines and checklists and kind of break down, especially those complex proposals to funding agencies like National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, or to other sponsors that just have a bit of a rigorous submission process. I can kind of help you break that down and think about what needs to be done first and who needs to be involved and what all we need to gather for that proposal. Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, but I'm happy to help you take a look at that and try to figure out a realistic way to approach getting it done. We can also talk about developing your proposal materials, such as your project description, your budget and budget justification, any of the supporting materials that might be required. I can't write, or I don't write grant proposals for people here at the university, but my role is to help support you as you do that, thinking about how to put that together in a way that answers to the call for proposals. And then I can certainly be especially helpful, I think, in the budget creation process, because there are some rules and regulations and policies and processes that we need to follow for that. And I can help you stay in line with what's appropriate there. And then I can provide feedback on your proposal materials. Of course, I'm not a geologist, I'm not a chemist, I'm not, many things that are represented here on our campus. So if you're looking for technical or scientific feedback on your proposal, of course, I suggest that people always seek out peer review from colleagues, but I can review your proposal materials in terms of, is it addressing the call for proposals? Is it addressing the review criteria? Is it consistent? Is it flowing well? Is it sometimes sponsors or funding agencies ask that you write for a more general audience, and so I can certainly give feedback in that area and help with editing and proofreading as needed. Of course, everybody's needs are going to be a little different, and I can work at whatever level is necessary or needed there. So just some general things to think about once you have decided you're going to actually start looking for grants. Keep in mind what funding sources are looking for as far as where to put their money. And some of those things are severity of need. So think about, what would the impact of your project be, and how would you describe that? Because reviewers are going to read your proposal and think about, should we be funding this? Should this project be done? And can the person proposing it get it done? So think about the impacts that your proposed project would have and how well you can describe that to make a compelling case for why it should be funded. You also want to think about, once you have identified a funding agency or organization, you want to think about whether or not, or they're going to be thinking about whether or not there is a shared mission there. You know, does the mission for their organization mesh with what you've outlined in your proposal? So there's a little bit of synchronicity that happens there between funder and grant applicant. They'll also be reading your proposal to make sure that you understand the problem you've identified and the solution you're proposing for your project to fill. So you'll want to make sure you explain that well and establish your expertise in that area, and give evidence of your capacity to do the project, experience that you have with doing that kind of project or that kind of work, history of success with that, those kinds of things. And they'll also be making sure that what you've outlined in your proposal is realistic. You know, have you proposed realistic goals, something that can be achieved within that project period? And does your budget align with that? Is it something that you can do with the funding they have available? So some things to think about, you know, when you're just getting started is then determine your need. You know, what are your needs for funding? And as you think about that, you might want to consider where you are in your career track, what kind of milestones you've set for yourself, you know, maybe in terms of tenure and promotion, or maybe a mid-career change in track, you know, maybe changing your focus for research or for programming or for service. What kind of funds is it that you're needing? Is it to, you know, pilot a project or gather preliminary data? Or are you needing funding to collaborate and plan with others, or for travel? You know, so think about actually what kind of funding you're in need of, because there are certain grants that speak specifically to different kinds of spending or costs, such as travel or such as fellowships, if time is what you need. And then think about whether or not you need to work with others. You need to bring others' expertise to bear. You know, is this going to be a multidisciplinary project or a multi-institutional project, which a lot of funding agencies love to see these days, that you're bringing lots of different hands on deck. And if so, I would, you know, try to get those potential partners or collaborators involved in the planning process as early as possible with you. You'll want to think about too, you know, is your idea fundable? So, you know, do some research, get to know the landscape out there of this particular area, do a literature review, find out what other projects, similar projects have been funded. So, because a lot of times, of course, a funding agency doesn't want to just duplicate efforts. So see if you can find where there is a particular need or a gap in knowledge or a need that's not being filled or a niche that's not being addressed, so that you're not just duplicating efforts. And then I think it's always helpful to think about maybe making a long-term plan for where you, for what you want to do in your career and how external funding can help address that. This can be helpful to kind of check the different funding opportunities you find. As you find them, check it against that long-term plan, because it's really easy to get distracted sometimes as you go out there and start actually looking for funding opportunities, and you find them and, oh, this sounds neat, oh, this sounds cool, this is a lot of money. It's very easy to get off track quickly and kind of get led down a path maybe you weren't intending to go down. So if you make a long-term plan about what it is you need funding for, what you want to achieve, you know, what are those career goals and milestones, and how can grant funding help support that? Then as you find funding opportunities, you can check it against that and make sure it fits. Or if you decide to deviate from that, at least you're doing it mindfully and thoughtfully. And that can just kind of help keep you focused as you sift through all the funding opportunities you might be coming across. So where to look? I send out funding opportunities every week to the different deans and chairs on campus, and then I believe they forward those on to you. So look for that. You can also sign up through me for topic-based emails, where I take those funding opportunities and send them to the different topic-based email groups I have, whether it's chemistry or mass communication or art and art history, that kind of thing. So you can sign up to get those funding opportunities directly, and I can email you that if you want me to. The link to the Google form, that is, where you can sign up for that. As I mentioned earlier, there's also a subscription or a funding database called SPIN that you can sign up for through me. It is a database of over 40,000 funding opportunities from federal, state, nonprofit, and foundation sources. And I can establish a profile for you in that system really quickly. And then you can just sign into that, do funding searches. You can save your searches. You can set it up to where the system will send you new funding opportunities that come available that fit the parameters you have searched for, if you select to do that. So again, just let me know if that's something you want to do, and we can work on that. And I can show you how to, do some funding searches in there and get started on some searches. And then you might also just want to do some things like, check out newsletters and websites for your professional organizations. A lot of the time they will announce funding opportunities that are particularly relevant for your area, your discipline. Sign up for listservs where you can get news on things like that. As you're reading in professional publications, as you're reading articles, look at the credits, look for how that work has been funded, because of course, when you receive a grant, you need to cite and give credit to that funding agency. So you can always just check out who's funding this kind of work in my area, just by paying attention to that as you read articles and things in your professional publications. And of course, always ask your colleagues and mentors for their ideas and where they've been successful. Grants.gov is a federal kind of clearinghouse of funding opportunities. You can subscribe to that for free and make selections of what kinds of funding opportunities you're interested in. That's just going to be federal funding opportunities, of course. And then, of course, individual funding agencies have websites and newsletters and listservs that you can subscribe to receive news on funding opportunities, such as National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, National Endowment for the Arts, etc. So always look for that if there's a funding agency that kind of seems to fit your particular area of interest. And I know Tim has joined us, and so I want to leave plenty of time for him and Bert to speak. So really quickly, as you find funding opportunities, one of the best things I can recommend you do is read that request for proposals or call for proposals or sponsor guidelines. Check it out for what it is that they fund, who they fund, to see if you're eligible, when their funding is available, if it's going to fit with your time frame or not, how much their awards are, to see if that's going to fit what your needs are, what kind of costs they fund or don't fund, because that'll be important depending on what your funding needs are. Be sure to check out what their selection criteria or review criteria are so that you can be sure to address that. And of course, how do you submit the proposal and when is the deadline for it? And what do they want to see in the proposal? And again, let me know, as early as you can or want to, and I can help you, kind of cull through these RFPs. Some of them are small, some of them can be 80 pages long, just depending on the funding agency. So I'm happy to help kind of cull through that and pull out the important points and discuss it with you as needed. There are a few other slides on here on some things you might want to pay attention to, but again, I don't want to eat into Tim and Bert's time. So I will send this maybe to Ashley if she's able to share that, or if you want to email me, I'll be happy to send these slides to you with just a few other tips on some things you want to do as you find funding opportunities and as you start to develop your proposal. So I can send that to you. And then this is just an overview of the proposal development process. But I'm going to stop right there because I know Tim's here, and we'll let him introduce himself, and then Tim and Bert can take it away.
Well, great. Thanks, Charlotte. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. And my apologies for being late. I had some technical snafus here, but glad to join you. Can you tell me what you've done so far?
So Bert and I have introduced ourselves, and I just went ahead and started with my slides and kind of told them what you and Bert were going to talk about, but went ahead and just went over my slides. And so we're ready for you to take it away if you're ready.
Well, thank you. And I'm eager to get to,
Tim, I should tell you, I have about, I don't know, 6 or 8 slides as well. Some of them overlap with Charlotte. I just thought I'd tell you that.
Okay. Great, thanks. So you can see this is a well-orchestrated program we have here. We rehearsed and we've practiced, but we're really very eager to get to your questions and the kinds of things you talk about. And I'm glad Bert got a chance to introduce himself, because that was my job, was to introduce him and tell you that his 200 years of continuous funding is really quite impressive. And not only that, I see that there are 3 chemists on board here too. So I'm preaching to the choir to tell you just how great Bert is and the kinds of successes he's enjoyed and the good work he's done with students. So really my take was to just get this ball rolling, which of course we're halfway through, and I don't want to take up too much time because I want to get to your questions, and I know Bert's got his slides. So I would just say that a big part of this game is part of what Charlotte had said, which Charlotte's just an invaluable resource for all of you to engage at any level of the process, as she outlined, whether it's exploring, working closely to understand the request for proposal and so on, and then helping you with your proposal and budget. And our office does that as well, but it's really Charlotte is the point person for that. But it's really on you to engage your network. And as a chemist, early on in my career, I started going to Gordon conferences, which is where we really engage with our peers, program officers, journal editors. And in the process of going to those meetings, I'd invariably get to a dull session, and I'd take notes to myself, just scribbles in the back of my notebook. And 15 years or so into it, I realized that looking back on those notes that I had outlined, every paper and grant I'd ever written. And so having that space at conferences to network and get some, clear thinking about what you want to do is just invaluable time. And those networks serve you well because those become your professional network, and you've done that in your postdocs and grad school. But as a professional now, you're isolated and in a small school where there's not a lot of intellectual there aren't intellectual peers in your specialty. There are a lot of smart people, but there aren't people within your sphere who can help you with the mentoring and coaching on your proposal the way your professional peers are, those that are in your discipline working in your area. So we can be here and tell you good stories about what has been successful for us, but the best thing we can do is support you getting out and engaging with your peers. I'm going to kick it over to Bert because I think we'll probably just tag team on questions. But Bert's got some slides, and Bert's got not just experience as a PI and mentor for years, but his experience at NSF is also invaluable, which is why I was so glad he agreed to join us. Bert, can I just kick it over to you?
Yes. So I'd like to hear from Brandy and then from Eva. Tell me your department. Tell me how long you've been here, and tell me how or what your research area is. And don't forget to unmute yourself. So Brandy, you go first, and then Eva.
Hey, Bert, I'm Brandy Bourne from the library. I'm the interim director. I've been here for a long time, 18 years or so.
Okay.
I'm Eva. I'm in the art and art history department, and I also teach humanities. So I've been working a lot on getting more visual arts into the different humanities sequences, 124, 214, 324, and 414. And so I'm trying to figure out how I can continue that work, maybe with some other disciplines. And that's where I'm looking for some grant money, because I had Mellon funding to do it for the reader and the other materials. So yeah, so that's where I come from. I've been here about 10 years.
Thank you. All right, so I was going to first talk a little bit about what I call rules of grantsmanship. And so here's the rules that you need to understand: that there's never enough time to write a grant proposal. So what you should do is develop a strategic plan for that grant proposal. And Charlotte kind of talked about this already, you know, a starting date, when you're going to do your literature review. I like storyboarding, where you kind of put together the various components of the proposal and show how they're linked up and decide when you're going to do each part. And I also say another rule is that writing a grant and getting funded is the closest you're ever going to come to making the hourly rate of a lawyer or a banker or a provost. So you need to go ahead and do it. The best piece of advice I can give you is the funding rate of proposals not submitted is 0. If you don't submit it, you're not going to get funded. I would also give advice about start early and then move that start date even earlier. Next piece of advice is don't be afraid to ask for help. And I always like to have someone that I really know is going to be critical review my proposal when I've got a draft and give me honest feedback. And having them say, oh yeah, that's great, is not really useful. You want someone who's going to give you the honest truth. And in my case, that's someone like Tim. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is how to think like a reviewer, because you're writing this proposal not for yourself, not for a journal, but for the reviewers. And I've reviewed, I don't know, 100, 200 proposals in my time. And so you're going to write to the reviewer, not to me, not to yourself, not to your friends, write to the reviewer. And their proposal is going to be judged by these reviewers. All right, so reviewers want to know 4 things. They want to know what are your goals? What are your objectives? And if it's an education proposal, make sure you can tie that project to student learning outcomes. So they want to know, what are your goals? What are your objectives? How will you do it? What's your technical approach? Then they want to know, can you do it? Do you have the facilities and do you have the expertise yourself to be successful? And Charlotte talked about, you know, in some proposals, you want to say, oh, there's great need for this. We're underfunded for this thing and we want to do this. Don't do that in a science proposal, because they want to make sure you have the capability of being successful. And then the most important part, in my opinion, is it worth doing? What is the intellectual merit and what are the broader impacts? Next, Charlotte. And that's all they want to know. So make sure you can convey those ideas. Next slide, about planning. So this is about a long-term plan, not just for your proposal, but for your career. So you need to develop, I'd say, a 3 to 5 year plan that in year 2, I'm going to write or year 3, I'm going to write a career proposal. In year 1, I'm going to learn how to teach. I'm going to get that stuff together. I'm going to write maybe a smaller grant to a smaller funding agency for, you know, maybe $50,000 to $100,000. And so I can get some experience and get some successes, because if you go to a place like NIH or NSF in your first year with no track record, you've got to have a really, really good idea for them to fund it. And so develop this 3 to 5 year plan and put it in a chart on your wall in your office. And then each year you should develop a strategic plan for that academic year that starts in the fall and runs through the spring. And you may have to revise it from year to year because things change. And then work with your department to make sure that your academic strategic plan fits other members of your department. And remember, you succeed when the team succeeds. So you're all in this together in your department, and everyone is going to share in your success. So next, let me give you some advice. So read the program announcement. Charlotte mentioned this. And what I always say, when it's dog-eared, when it's highlighted, when there's wine glass stains on it, then you're probably ready to start writing. Next. So if your ideas are too narrow or don't fit a program, look for other sources. Next. Work on projects you care about deeply. It's not difficult for a reviewer to tell if you really care about this project. So don't be afraid to show the passion you have for your ideas. Next. So this is the most important thing I can tell you, is have awesome ideas. And one of the most difficult things I say in deciding who to hire in your department is determining, do they have lots of really good ideas? And Tim talked a little bit about where you get ideas. So it's in grad school or as a postdoc, you read literature and you have to maintain that. And it's difficult because you're trying to teach a 4-4 load. So what I would do is I would keep an article at home that I would read before I went to bed. Because one thing I found was my mind keeps working. And even when I'm sleeping, my mind works. And I'll wake up in the middle of the night with an idea. And I had a scratch paper beside my bed, and I would write down ideas on that scratch paper. Tim mentioned the importance of going to conferences, and the Gordon Research Conferences are one of the best because you get to network with other professionals. Next, please. So build on what others have done, but it must be an innovative extension, not just an obvious next step. Next. So you'll realize most of these are really focused on science. Next. Yeah, projects need to have more than local impact. If you're going to do some research or an education proposal, yeah, it's going to have an impact on your institution, but the funding agencies want to see, oh, this is a good idea for other institutions to adopt. Next. How can you build on the work of others and use their work? Next. Make sure you have measurable goals and objectives, especially for education proposals. Next. And there has to be a realistic amount of work. I know my first proposal I wrote when I was fresh out of graduate school, I then realized, oh my God, I couldn't do this in 5 years, because I thought, well, this is what I can do. That's what I did in graduate school. But hey, things have changed. So make sure you have a realistic timeline. Okay, next slide, please. Keep going. Let's go ahead and skip through this one. So the one thing I want to say, go back. Can you go back or not? Yeah. One thing I want to say here is the third one, that a proposal gives visibility to your ideas to the larger scientific community, and it gets you feedback on your ideas. You think you have these awesome ideas and you submit them, and reviewers, 5 or 6 reviewers will give you feedback. That's invaluable. Where else can you get that other than experts in these fields that are telling you about your ideas? Next slide, please. So we know about project summary. Next. You need some background information about you and the school. And I think Charlotte can probably help you put together a paragraph about UNC Asheville. What is so special about UNC Asheville? Because it turns out most reviewers don't know squat about UNC Asheville. So you're going to have research goals, a rationale why these are important, and a plan about how you're going to accomplish these goals. Next. For education proposals, you're going to have 4 plans: a management plan, implementation plan, an evaluation assessment plan, and a dissemination plan. And oftentimes you'll put these in a table. Next. And Charlotte talked about budget justifications. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the first thing you should write is your research objective, and it needs to be very concise. It needs to be 30 plus or minus 15 words. It's what I call the elevator speech. It's what you would give to someone to convince them that they should fund this project. That's your research objective. Reviewers are going to read the one-page project summary. They're probably going to go look at your CV. They may look at your current and pending support. And if that doesn't excite them, they may not read the proposal very carefully. You know, if you're in a panel and you've got 10 of these to read, some get read very carefully and some not so carefully. So make sure you can grab people's attention early on about your research objectives. Yeah, put it up front, sentence 1, paragraph 1, next. And it should start, the research objective of this project is whatever, next. About 30 words, next. Be specific about what you intend to find. And let's skip to the next, some do's and don'ts. Yeah. And the rationales to convince them that this is a good idea. So go ahead and let's skip this slide. We can send those to people who want to see them. I'm worried about time. So do's, carefully read the proposal guidelines. Start early, move that start date even earlier. Attend the agency's grant writing workshops. Almost all of the places offer these things. Try to go to those. Talk to your program officer as appropriate. Don't become a pain in the ass. The thing I hated at NSF is you'd have someone call in and ask a question, and you'd say, well, if you look on page 5 of the solicitation, paragraph 3A, you'll find the answer to your question. And that's one of the worst things that can happen to you. So make sure it's an appropriate question and make sure it's not wasting the program officer's time. And learn to use the lingo of the agency. When I got to NSF, everything had to be innovative. And by my 3rd year, it needed to be transformative, not only innovative, but it needed to change what you're doing and change what other people do as well. So you can learn that by reading solicitations over a period of time. Next. Make it easy to read. Lots of spaces, large font, have it maybe in an outline format. Double check your work, check it again, and then have a critic read it. The worst thing I ever saw was, I saw this 3 times, a proposal submitted with track changes still there. And it says, hey, Bill, do you think we should put this paragraph in or not? I mean, oh my God, that's terrible. Next. All right, and then start early and then start even earlier. So I'm going to stop now and let Tim take over or take questions or however you want to do it.
Thanks, Bert. Can you say just a little bit more about assessment? Because it seems to me that I've seen so many really good proposals that, especially education proposals, that put together a beautiful plan. They've got great promise, and they shortchange the assessment, and it tanks their proposal. So go ahead.
Yeah. So and actually, I think I'm an external evaluator for 5 or 6 proposals now from NSF. And so each objective you have has to have an assessment component. And that assessment can be a variety of, and it can't all be just numbers. You know, we're going to increase our retention rate by 25%, or we're going to double our number of majors. I mean, those are important, but it can't be just that. You need to talk about the objectives that impact student learning and how are you going to evaluate that? And there's a number of things you can do. You could say we're going to use a survey of students. We're going to do it pre and then post our intervention. And we're going to use a 5-point Likert scale to evaluate students' responses. And if it's related to research, then the University of Colorado has these SOG surveys that student assessment of learning gains by doing undergraduate research or being engaged in some course. So if there are assessment tools that have been developed, say you're going to use those, especially ones that have been benchmarked. If not, then you got to make sure you can develop your own and make sure you assess every objective and then tell us what the benchmark is for success.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And one other point I'd make is that you said, awesome ideas are essential. I also think thick skin is essential. You got to be able to go in and get ready to get roughed up a little bit, because I remember some of my proposals that I thought were the most awesome ideas I'd had came back with some critical comments, and it's like they were picking on my kids. You know, I mean, I take it personally, and you got to be able to take those lumps and get back in there because, you know, even when they're and some of the criticisms will be off base, and you got to find a way to finesse your response to the program officer to say that, you know, you take that advice at face value, and here's how you think about it, and it impacts how you've altered your proposal. But, you know, it's the funding rate for a resubmission is much higher than a first submission. And so that feedback you get, even the pieces that are off base, a lot of times the program officer is going to see it's off base too. So
the funding rate at NSF for a first-time submission is about 15 or 20% in a good year. But for a second submission, a resubmission is more in the 40% range. And I remember one time I got the kind of feedback you're talking about, Tim, and some reviewer said, well, you didn't talk about the kinetic analysis of something. And so I emailed the program officer and said, oh, I guess I didn't highlight that enough because the bottom of page 6 and the top of page 7 has a paragraph about my kinetic analysis. I guess what I should do next is set it off in with a separate paragraph with a bold-faced heading, kinetic analysis, to make it clear that it's there. Because I was trying to tell the program officer, don't use that jerk again to review my proposal, because they didn't read it carefully.
Thanks, Bert, and thanks, Charlotte. Can we ask questions now, or ask folks if they have questions?
It's y'all show, absolutely.
I'll ask a question. I don't know how well it's formed about collaboration. So Charlotte mentioned a little bit about that. And I know obviously it depends on the call and the type of grant that you're submitting to, how that works, and how much collaboration might play into it. I'm just wondering if you guys can speak a little bit about like a typical, maybe, I don't know, NSF, since that's Bert's expertise, but like across the board, like how do you optimize the collaboration and get in the sweet spot where if it's like an individual PI proposal, I guess is what I'm saying, but you have like collaborators or supporting people, like how do you manage it without seeming like it's too much of not your work, but that you're getting the expertise that you need to help you? Do you have any advice about that?
That's especially difficult if your collaborator is at a research university. And I had one of those. And you have to it has to become clear that these are your ideas, but a collaborator has to be someone who the reviewers would say, well, this PI needs this piece of expertise that in your case she doesn't have. And yeah, that person has it. And so that's going to result in a much better outcome. I remember in the late 90s, I had written a proposal to NSF, and they said, well, you need a collaborator that's going to do electronic structural calculations. You need a theoretical chemist involved in this, and you don't have one. And the program officer said, okay, we're going to fund this one, but next time you submit a proposal, you better have a collaborator. So if it's pretty clear to you that there's a piece of expertise you need, then go find it. Go find that person. And you can do them with a subaward. You can do it where you both submit a proposal that's linked. So there's a variety of ways to do it, but work with your program officer to decide the best way to do it. And the program officer can be convinced that, yeah, you're the person with the ideas, and this person at a research or bigger university or research university is providing essential expertise.
You know, Caitlin, I would add, I think Bert's spot on with his comments. You want to be careful going back to people who've been your mentor. because then that looks like it's an extension of old work or their work. So really creating your own, and this is part of your trajectory as an independent scholar as well, establishing your own track record. But also, you want to be careful in these collaborations to, I'm actually going to double down on what Bert said, to map out exactly what your intellectual contribution is. And I've had it, and peers of mine as well. I retired from Hamilton College, where I was for 21 years, and I had collaborations with all sorts of folks. And there were cases where our work, the work of my students in my laboratory, was put into papers and published without us on those papers. And that also happened to my chair, because I brought in the chair at the time. I said, "Look at this," and he said, "Look at this." And it just happened to him too. A full table of his work had been put into their collaborators' work. And then I got an invitation to review a proposal from PRF, and I opened it up. It was my proposal submitted by one of my collaborators. And so then I was in the uncomfortable situation of, this guy should have been fired for plagiarism, right? But I said, you need to withdraw this today, because they could think that I was plagiarizing. So I think and these aren't terrible people. Those are terrible things they did. But when you think of somebody at an R1, they're managing their groups. They're managing, they're business leaders in their own right. And so their collaborations with us sometimes just get lost in terms of how important it is to us. So that's why I just really emphasize really mapping out with them exactly what you're going to do and what your domain is and what the expectations are at publication time.
Thank you both.
I have also a question. I'm sorry, I don't have it really structured in my head yet, but I just wanted to see what do you think about success of proposals that are not something that will solve the world crisis, but something that is more concentrated, like on basic research. So I guess the general question is: do you see a success for the basic research proposals versus something that is much more unique and big and brand new?
I would say on a research proposal, you want the reviewer to read that and say, "Damn, I wish I would have thought of that." If it's an obvious extension of something you've done or you did in your graduate work or your postdoc, reviewers are going to say, "Oh, they're just taking those ideas from their research mentor and trying to do a small extension." It needs to be something that they say, "Wow, that's really innovative. God, why didn't I think of that?" So it needs, but it also has to be something that they'll look at and say, "Well, yeah, she has the expertise to do this, but that's really innovative. I really like that idea a lot." So it can be basic research. It just has to be something that adds to the knowledge base, and it doesn't have to solve, the next great solar cell problem, right? Because there aren't many of those out there. But it needs to be something that the reviewer and the program officer says, "That's really interesting. That's innovative. I wish I would have thought of that."
Well, I've never had one of those ideas, Bert, but back when we started, it was an interesting change of sort of culture shift that your proposal was measured on its intellectual merits. And if there was applied work, it was really the kiss of death to start to build applied work into your proposal. And that has shifted dramatically now, that it isn't as though intellectual merit is ignored, but there's a real privileging of applied work. And if you can show the broader impact of your work through the applied means, it really ratchets it up in terms of its relevance and attractiveness. But I always was I could do that while sneaking in the intellectual piece, because there's always going to be one of these old school people who's going to be, look, this has to be driven by real intellectual heft, not just a good applied idea. So I think it's a balance right now. Bert, what's your sense of that balance?
Yeah, there's no doubt that I think that there's more interest in technology and things that can benefit technology, but people also understand, the technology today was someone's basic research 20 years ago. Now they'd like it to be 10 years ago because they want to shorten that timeline. But I do think you have areas that are more interested in, okay, can this be adapted to help humankind? Can this be adapted to help science? Yeah.
Well, we're getting close to the end here, and what I would say is that feel free to reach out to any of us, and certainly the Office of Sponsored Research, where Charlotte and Louis Toms reside when they're not working remotely, and that's I just drop in occasionally, but you can reach out to any of us at any time to help with your questions, or if you just need to brainstorm about how to navigate institutional kinds of things like course releases and matching funds and the kinds of things where those are conversations you're going to have with the institution, and you're going to need to position yourself well for those, and put the ask at the right time in the right place, and help them. As a former administrator, you want to come in with an understanding of how to help me say yes, and so that's a good conversation to have.
Yeah, I want to sort of reinforce that. As I said early on, this 4-4 teaching load is tough to be successful with scholarship. And so as you write in course release time or reassign time, let Tim be a person who will help champion that for you. Don't be afraid to reach out to Tim and to Charlotte and let them champion that with the administration, because they can be very effective, much more effective than an assistant professor can be.
Well, Charlotte, Tim, Bert, we thank y'all very much for doing the brown bag today. And we thank everybody else for showing up today. And we hope to see y'all at some future brown bags.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much, Ashley. And I saw a question from someone about sharing slides. I'll just go ahead and send my slides to everybody. I think I got everybody's name down.
Thanks, Bert. Thanks, Charlotte. And thank you all for attending.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a good one.